I knew Vivian, my older sister, had never liked me, but I never thought she would go that far. The birthday dinner took place in an old house in Greenwich, warm yellow light spilling over the long dining table draped in a white tablecloth. Cutlery clinked softly. The atmosphere seemed calm. Until Vivian pushed a small box toward me and laughed. A DNA test kit. Maybe this will explain why you've always been the wrong child in this family. She said it loud enough for the entire table to fall into dead silence. I swallowed the humiliation and still opened the box. I sent the sample the very next morning. Not because of the insult, but because of the look on my mother's face at that moment. Completely pale. Several months later, an email appeared from the lawyer managing the Kensington family estate. Just a single line: "We need to meet urgently." And in that exact moment, I understood something that made my blood run cold. They had known all along. Before I continue, where are you watching this video from, and what time is it for you? Leave a comment. I always read them, so I know you're still here with me. Now, let's go back to that dinner where a birthday gift that seemed harmless began to tear my entire family apart. I had left that house many years ago. But there are families where the farther you go, the harder they pull you back. I lived in New York, in a small apartment overlooking a street that was always loud, not luxurious, no history, but enough space to breathe. My mornings began with black coffee, the sound of buses stopping at red lights, and sunlight reflecting off the glass windows of the office building across the street. No one here knew I was the daughter of the Kensington family in Greenwich, and I liked it that way. In New York, I was just Audrey, not the child who is always outside the frame, not the name called last if it was remembered at all. I learned how to live neatly, speak less, do things right, expect nothing from anyone. That was the only way I knew to keep everything from falling apart. I worked in financial compliance control. My job was to see the things other people deliberately ignored. Numbers that were out of rhythm, details that did not line up. Maybe because I had been familiar with that feeling since very early on. Every day looked the same. Emails, meetings, polite words that carried no emotion. A safe rhythm but an empty one. Sometimes, in the middle of a work shift, I still thought about the house in Greenwich. Not because I missed it, but because there are memories that do not need to be named, they find their own way back. I used to think if I lived far enough away, quietly enough, independently enough, everything would stop there. I was wrong. The call came late one afternoon. My mother's number appeared on the screen so rare that I froze for a few seconds before answering. Her voice did not tremble. It did not break. It was just empty. "Your father is gone." There was no long explanation. No tears through the phone. Just a fact falling into place clean and cold. I sat there for a long time afterward. I did not cry. I did not speak. I did. My father, Charles Kensington, was the only person in that house who had ever looked at me as a complete human being. And now, he was no longer there. I understood immediately in that moment. I had not just lost a father. I had just lost my final layer of protection. I booked a ticket back to Greenwich that very night. No advance notice. No questions. Not because I wanted to return, but because there are things that, if you do not face them, they will chase you for the rest of your life. I did not know that. By stepping back into that house, I was also stepping into a truth that had been hidden for many years. I cannot remember the last time my name was called before Vivian's. The house in Greenwich was always bright, not warm light, but the kind of light that made everything look perfect when seen from outside the gate. Inside, I learned to walk softly, speak quietly, and stand close to the wall when there were many people around. At family gatherings, I was usually the one who arrived the earliest, and left before anyone noticed I had been there at all. I helped set the table, carried glasses, cleaned up the things no one else wanted to touch. No one told me to do it, but no one stopped me either. When guests asked, "Who is this girl?" my mother smiled politely. "Oh, my daughter." That was all, nothing more. Some afternoons, I stood at the top of the second floor staircase, looking down into the living room where Vivian was telling stories. People laughed at the right moments. My mother nodded at the right places. I was never asked to join in. But if I tried to leave, she would ask, "Where are you going?" Not out of concern, but because my absence disrupted the perfect composition she was maintaining. I learned how to stand still, like a decorative object, not allowed to disappear. Vivian never had to try to get attention. She entered a room as if the room had already been waiting for her. Every achievement of Vivian's was met with applause. Every mistake she made was given gentle names: personality, youth, pressure. Not me. When I got high grades, my mother simply nodded. When I stayed quiet, she considered it good behavior. And when Vivian spoke too loudly, for too long no one seemed bothered. I learned something very early on in this family. My presence was only accepted when it did not inconvenience anyone. My mother, Eleanor Kensington, never raised her voice at me. She also never held me when I needed it. Her coldness was not loud, it was orderly and repetitive. She remembered Vivian's schedule, she forgot mine. When I needed confirmation, she changed the subject. When I needed an answer, she said, "Not right now." There were no scoldings, only long stretches of emptiness. Once I asked my mother if she was proud of me. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "You're always fine." That was the answer she used for everything I needed. Not a denial, but not an acknowledgement either. From that day on, I understood. In my mother's eyes, I was not the child who needed support. I was the child who was expected to quietly disappear at the appropriate time. I grew up in a family without beatings, without shouting, yet everything that mattered to me was deliberately overlooked. There was at least one person in that house who never turned away from me. My father, Charles Kensington, was not a man of many words. He did not enter a room to take up space. He stopped, observed, and remembered. He was the only one who noticed when I stopped appearing at family dinners. He did not ask loudly. He would simply stop by my room afterward, knock gently, as if afraid of startling me. "Have you eaten?" Just one question, but one no one else had ever asked. He noticed very small things: a book I had left unfinished, a cup I always placed slightly to the left, details that only someone who truly sees you would notice. And I understood he saw me, even when the rest of the house no longer did. My father did not protect me with words. He did it by not letting things slide too far. When my mother forgot the name of my homeroom teacher, he reminded her. When Vivian mocked too much, he changed the subject. No confrontation, just adjustment very quietly. Some evenings, he left a portion of food in the oven, even when no one knew if I would come down in time. Some days, he sent me a short message: "Dad sees you." 3 words, no explanation, no promises, but enough for me to know I had not imagined the feeling of being forgotten. And enough for me to understand. Someone in this family had acknowledged that I existed. Much later, I realized my father had begun preparing very early on. Not openly, not with warning. He kept records, notes, and spoke to a lawyer, alone. Not because he doubted me, but because he did not trust that system to treat me fairly when he was no longer there. He never told me any of this, and at the time, I did not understand why. Until I realized my father had been planning to protect me long before I ever knew I needed protection. That house was still standing, but something inside it had shifted. I drove into Greenwich on a gray afternoon. The rows of trees along the road were still perfectly aligned. The low stone walls still kept the same distance from the street. Everything looked so familiar that it felt suspicious. When the iron gate opened, I slowed down by instinct, not because I needed time, but because my body had learned caution in this place. The house stood there large, silent, and spotless, like a carefully color-corrected photograph. There were no signs of mourning, no wilted flowers, nothing that suggested someone had just left forever. I turned off the engine. The silence fell too quickly, and in that moment, I knew this return was not welcome. Inside, the house felt colder than I remembered. Not because of the air conditioning, but because no one was adjusting it according to my father's habits anymore. The scent of polished wood mixed with dried orange peel, familiar, but not warm. The paintings still hung in their places. The wall clock was still running half a beat slower than the watch on my wrist. A small misalignment, but enough to notice. There were no new photographs, no traces of anyone having cried, only an arrangement that was too neat, as if emotion had been cleared away before I arrived. My mother stood at the end of the hallway. She did not step closer. She did not turn away. "You're back." Not a question, not a greeting. She looked at me the way one looks at an object that has just been put back in the correct position, nothing more. I waited for a hug, or at least a pause, but she turned away before I could say anything. And in that moment, I understood this silence was not accidental. It was waiting for something to happen. Vivian entered as if the house itself had been waiting for her. She appeared on the back steps, unhurried. Her heels struck a steady rhythm against the stone floor, the familiar sound of confidence that did not ask permission. She wore a cream-colored outfit, fitted so precisely it could not have been accidental. The clothing of someone who knows she will stand at the center of the picture. Her eyes swept over me, quick and efficient, like checking an item that had been placed where it belonged. "You're back," she said. Her voice was light, not warm, not cold, just unconcerned. Vivian walked straight into the living room. She did not ask where our father was. She did not ask how I was, as if everything that mattered had already been handled. And in that moment, I understood she was behaving like the owner of the house. Vivian set her handbag down on the table exactly where my father used to sit. No one objected. No one asked her to change seats. Vivian's authority did not come from words. It came from the fact that no one thought they had the right to question her. The kitchen lights were on, even though it was not yet time to eat. The tablecloth had been ironed flat. The wine glasses were arranged in pairs, no extras. There was no birthday cake, no flowers, only a menu taped to the refrigerator, handwritten in my mother's script. Vivian stood beside it, speaking in low tones with Eleanor. They spoke very quietly, but long enough for me to know I was not part of that conversation. No one asked what I wanted to eat. No one mentioned my day. This dinner was not meant to welcome me. The sound of cutlery touching plates came earlier than necessary. Like a signal sent in advance, everything was ready, just waiting for me to sit down. And then I realized I had not been invited back to reunite. I had been invited back to witness. No one said that this dinner was for me. Everyone sat down almost at the same time, chairs scraping against the wooden floor in a steady chain of sounds. I remained standing for one extra beat, waiting to see where my seat would be. No one pointed, no one asked. There was one empty chair at the end of the table, not between two people, no extra plate beside it. I pulled the chair out and sat down, with the feeling that I had just accepted a position that had been arranged in advance. Wine was poured around the table. When it reached me, the bottle paused for a very brief moment, then moved on. I said nothing. I simply placed my hand on the edge of the table, keeping my fingers from shaking. The conversations began: work, travel, plans I was never asked about. With every burst of laughter, I became more aware I was here as an extra detail. Vivian sat across from me. She spoke loudly enough for the whole table to hear, but her eyes only landed on me when necessary. "Our family has always been special," she smiled, "especially when there are people who are very different." A few people laughed along. No one asked what different meant. Vivian talked about her work, then moved on to old memories. The stories were told in a way that turned me into background scenery, always present, never the focus. I could feel it clearly. She was pulling the strings, testing reactions, testing limits. My mother did not interrupt. She simply nodded, as if everything were unfolding exactly as planned. I did not respond. I did not argue. I did not ask for an explanation. And my silence seemed to please Vivian more than anything else. If you are still listening at this point, please comment the number 1 so I know you are still here with this story. I noticed the looks around the table, waiting for something. The main course was served. Knives touched plates. Spoons stirred softly in glasses. Small sounds suddenly became too clear. Vivian grew unusually quiet. She did not speak. She did not smile. She only watched like someone waiting for the right moment. I could feel it in the air. The anticipation. The tension. as if everyone at the table had been informed in advance and I was the only one who had not. My mother twisted the ring on her finger, again and again, a habit she only had when she was anxious. I looked up. Our eyes met for a very brief moment. Then Vivian placed her hand on a small box beside her chair. No one spoke, and I understood this dinner had just shifted into another chapter. I did not yet know what was inside that box, but I knew for certain it had not been brought to celebrate. The box was placed on the table, before dessert. Vivian slid the small box toward the center of the table, slowly, as if presenting a special gift. The glossy wrapping reflected the chandelier light, shimmering more than necessary. "I brought something," she said, her voice so light it was almost polite, "just to clarify a few things." No one laughed. No one asked. The silence grew heavy, pressing down on the space between us. Vivian opened the lid. Inside was a DNA test kit. "Maybe," she continued, "this will explain why someone in our family has always felt out of place." A few glances turned toward me, quickly, then looked away. Someone frowned, as if about to say something, then stopped. Someone else took a sip of wine too quickly, spilling it over the rim of the glass. No one spoke, but the entire room seemed to make a shared decision to pretend this was normal. My heart slowed not because I was calm, but because my body was freezing itself, as if it were afraid of being caught looking too closely. I said nothing. I looked at the box, at the clear, cold lettering. The shame rose not because of the words, but because of how it was presented. Public, casual, prepared. Vivian leaned back, satisfied. She did not need to say anything more. Everyone understood who the message was meant for. My mother looked down at the table. Her hand tightened slightly, then relaxed. No objection, no intervention, only silence as if this had been approved in advance. A relative cleared their throat. Someone shifted their chair. A knife touched a plate with a very small sound. That sound rang out too clearly, like a signal allowing everything to continue. The meal did not stop. Dessert was still served. And in that moment, I understood this silence was not accidental. It was a choice. No one said, "Stop." No one asked, "Are you okay?" The humiliation did not explode. It spread slowly, coldly. I realized then that the worst part was not the box. It was that not a single person stood on my side. That night, when the house fell into silence, I looked at the box once more, and then I decided I would send in the DNA sample. The results arrived sooner than I expected. The email appeared at midday. No notification sound, no flashing alert, just a subject line so ordinary it felt suspicious. I opened it, my hand did not shake. My heart did not beat faster, as if my body had been preparing for this for a very long time. The screen lit up, clean lines of text, no emotion, no detours, no biological relationship. I read it again, once, then again, not because I did not understand, but because I wanted to be certain this truth was printed clearly into my memory. There was an explanation section below, terminology, charts, numbers, everything clean, precise, cold. I skimmed through them like someone who already knew what they would find. The room was quiet. The air conditioner hummed softly. Outside the window, sunlight slid across the tabletop and stopped at the edge of a chair. I sat there, not crying, not sighing. The only feeling that surfaced was confirmation, the thing I had been waiting for all these years. Even though I had never named it, I closed my eyes. Memories did not rush in. They lined up, orderly, as if they had finally been allowed into the light. The meals where I always sat slightly off to the side. The stories that were cut off midway. The compliments that passed me by like wind. There was no longer a question of why. No more effort to prove anything. I realized I had not lost anything in this moment. What made my blood run cold was not the result, but how familiar it felt, as if my entire life I had been living inside this answer. I just had never had proof to name it. The truth did not come to destroy me. It came to free me from having to doubt myself. I was simply naming a truth that had existed for a very long time. The pain did not explode, it settled. lighter, clearer. I opened my eyes, looked at the email one last time, then saved it. No screenshots. No sending it to anyone. Not yet. Some truths do not need to be shouted. They need to be held tightly until the right person has to hear them. That afternoon, Vivian sent a message, no greeting, no detour, just one short sentence, seemingly harmless. Are you okay? I looked at the screen. I did not reply immediately. The question came too soon. Then Eleanor. A missed call. Then another message. Mom just wants to know where you are. No question mark. No waiting for a response. I checked the timeline. The email arrived at 12:17. Vivian's message came at 12:31, a gap short enough to make me pause. I checked the time zone. No discrepancy, no system error. Everything lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. If I had barely had time to process what I had read, they had already reacted, and that could only happen one way. They were not asking about the result. They were asking about me, as if what they cared about was not the truth, but how much of it I already knew. That evening, I opened my calendar. There was an appointment added that I had not created. The sender's name was familiar, the tone polite, the content vague. To discuss several matters related to the family. I stared at the screen. And for the first time, I understood some people do not wait for results, because they already know what they are. The next morning, I received another email. This time, it was not from the testing lab. That email was not sent to the wrong person. It arrived in the evening. No lab logo, no long greeting, just a professional address, a domain familiar to anyone who had ever dealt with serious paperwork. Regarding family assets, I read slowly, line by line. The tone was neutral, but the purpose was very clear. A meeting was proposed, a specific time, a specific location. It did not ask whether I was available. The email did not use the word discussion. It used the phrase related to obligations and rights. No emotion, no choice. I recognized this style immediately. It was not written to persuade. It was written to establish position. The sender did not need my agreement. They only needed my presence. And the fact that this email arrived so quickly said one thing very clearly: someone was more anxious than I had expected. I pulled up my calendar. The appointment was already there, as if the sender was certain I would attend. There was an attachment. I did not open it right away. I looked at the file name, the date numbers spelled out in sequence, and a small symbol at the end, something I had seen on a few old documents in the house before. Not a signature, an internal confirmation mark. I closed the laptop, sat still, did not call back, did not reply. Silence, this time, was a deliberate choice. The next morning, Vivian called. No text beforehand, no detour. You should talk to a lawyer, she said, as if offering casual advice. Things are about to get more complicated. I asked softly. Complicated how? There was a pause, short, but long enough for me to hear the urgency on the other end. It's just procedure, Vivian replied. Everyone wants things to be clear. Everyone, not me. I hung up. For the first time, I did not feel the need to be polite. The pieces came together very quickly. Not because of the DNA result, but because of the timing. Because someone was running before the door had time to close. If this had simply been a newly discovered truth, they would have waited. But they did not wait. And that said everything. I opened the email again. This time, I read the fine print. The clauses, the phrasing. There were sentences that did not say everything, but their implications were unmistakable. I did not respond immediately. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed the right person to speak to. I wrote a few notes, printed the email, folded it, placed it into an empty file folder. Before, I always reacted, explained, asked to be heard. Family had once been a place where things were spoken in familiar voices, through memory and emotion. But from this moment on, every word would be measured by consequence. There would be no room left for softness, no space for misunderstanding. I would not walk into that meeting as a daughter. I would walk in as a party of interest. This time, I chose preparation. I looked at the calendar. The meeting date stood out clearly, no longer a choice, a turning point. And I knew from this moment on, nothing would happen in the kitchen or the living room anymore. The meeting was confirmed. The location was not the house, not a cafe, but a place where truth is recorded in ink. The news did not spread with noise. It spread through quiet phone calls. I did not receive any official notification right after the meeting. No confirmation email. No new calendar invite. Just a prolonged silence long enough for people to begin adjusting their behavior. A relative sent a message to check in, their wording more cautious than before. A former colleague sent a brief greeting, avoiding any mention of family. Relationships that had once been casual suddenly became unusually proper. In the office hallway, nods replaced greetings. A conversation stopped when I approached. Eyes glanced quickly, then turned away not out of fear, but calculation. When a story has not yet been fully told, people instinctively choose the safest edge to stand on. I understood what that meant. When information has not been made public, people protect themselves. In places where I was not present, the story continued, but the tone had changed. No more judgment, no more rushed conclusions, just questions being asked and eyes lingering on one another a beat longer than usual. I did not interfere. I did not correct anything. I did not push back. Truth, once it enters the room, knows how to take a seat on its own. The family began meeting without inviting me. I knew because meetings like that always leave traces. Schedule changes, canceled calls, familiar names appearing in the same time slots. Some people actively avoided me. Others tried to act normal. Both reactions meant the same thing: the old balance had been disrupted. Those who once spoke on Vivian's behalf began to fall silent. Appointments were postponed. Decisions were under review. No one said I was right, but many stopped insisting that she was. In that space, power shifted without any announcement. One evening, I received a message from someone who had never contacted me privately before. "Is everything okay?" No emojis, no reassurance. The question was sent like a test. I replied briefly, neutral, offering no information. Polite enough, not enough to be exploited. I realized that power does not always come from speaking the truth. Sometimes, it comes from knowing when to stay silent. Silence, used at the right moment, forces others to fill in the gaps themselves in ways that are most disadvantageous to them. Vivian no longer called with certainty in her voice. This time, she texted first. The message was longer. There were explanations. There was a suggestion to talk things through clearly. I did not respond immediately. A few hours later, she called again. I answered, but did not speak first. I let her fill the silence. Vivian's voice was faster than usual, her words overlapping. Not anger, anxiety at losing control. She mentioned misunderstandings, she mentioned family, she mentioned what's best for everyone, but she carefully avoided timing, avoided who had rushed. When I spoke, I said only one sentence, not loud, not sharp. "Are you reacting to what happened, or to what you're afraid others might find out?" On the other end of the line, there was no immediate answer. For the first time, Vivian lost her rhythm. That night, I received another message. The sender was not Vivian, and the content was only one line: "We need to talk soon." Not every victory needs a loser. Morning arrived more slowly than I expected. There were no urgent alarms, no new messages that had to be answered immediately. Light filtered through the curtains, soft and even enough to make the room feel as if it were breathing with me. I made coffee, stood still for a few beats. For the first time in months, I did not need to check my phone before taking the first sip. Not because everything was over, but because I had stopped running. Outside, the city continued to function. The sound of traffic faded in the distance. A very ordinary morning, and that was exactly what made me realize this ordinary can also be an achievement. What had happened did not disappear, but it no longer stood between me and the present. The storm passed and left behind a quiet sky, not empty, but wide enough for me to place myself back where I belonged. The call came around midday. I looked at the screen and recognized the familiar name. This time, I did not avoid it. I did not rush either. The voice on the other end was slower, less certain. There were pauses that were not filled with reasons. I listened all the way through. When it was my turn, I did not explain at length. I did not recount what I had endured. I only spoke about what I would no longer do. No arguments, no bargaining, just boundaries clear, close enough to touch, and far enough not to be crossed. On the other end of the line, there was a sigh, not regret, acceptance, arriving late. I did not need it to come sooner. I did not need it to arrive the right way. I only needed to know that I had said what needed to be said, not to be understood, but to hear myself clearly. When the call ended, the room remained quiet, but something inside me had shifted, lighter. Not because anyone else had changed, but because I had chosen not to keep straining myself to maintain harmony. In the weeks that followed, I reorganized small things, adjusted my schedule, let go of some belongings, changed habits that had been built for adaptation, not for living. I did not cut ties. I stepped back to the right distance, far enough not to be pulled into stories that were never mine, far enough not to have to explain every time I chose silence. Letting go, I realized, was not about abandoning someone else. It was about abandoning the version of myself who believed she had to endure in order to stay. I chose a quieter life, not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to no longer need to prove anything. And in that quiet space, I understood this. Healing is not loud. It happens when you no longer have to prepare answers for anyone. Not every story needs a loud ending. Maybe this story is not about me. Maybe it is about a moment when you stayed silent to keep the peace. A moment when you nodded, even though you were already exhausted inside. There are relationships that only function when you are the one carrying everything. When you are the one who is understanding. The one who says it's fine. The one who can always be put last. And gradually, that becomes a fixed role, one no one ever asks if you want to keep playing. We are often taught that endurance equals maturity, that keeping things calm is good. But if that calm only exists when you keep shrinking yourself, then perhaps the problem is not you. This story does not end with a victory. It ends with a choice to stop proving. If you are still listening at this point, please comment the number 1. Not to agree, but to let me know you are still here with the story. Have you ever been in a relationship where you were always the one adjusting? Always the one apologizing first? Always the one explaining someone else's silence? Maybe you do not need a dramatic reversal. Maybe you just need to stop at the right moment. Stop to hear your own feelings clearly. Instead of guessing what others expect you to be, share if you want. Keep it to yourself if you prefer. Just remember this: boundaries do not make you lonely. They place you where you belong. If this story made you slow down for a beat, if it made you think of a moment when you overlooked yourself, then maybe you are in the right place. This channel does not tell stories for satisfaction or spectacle. We tell them so you can realize this: you are not weak, you have simply carried too much. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can share more meaningful and valuable life stories with you. See you in the next story.